Thanks, and a warm welcome from my side too. I've met a few of you during the day yesterday, and I'm happy to meet more of you today. But let's get into the keynote. Give me 10 minutes, I'll give you the truth about verified identities. Some joined maybe my keynote last year and remember the title. So I would like to take the time to do a short recap about what we talked last year about. Give me 10 minutes, I'll give you the truth about identity. So last year, the keynote was about identity management in general. So we have seen authentication options, we have talked about customer experience, progressive profiling, about linking the digital and the real-world identity, so logging into digital portals, as well as accessing local stores, going to a sports event, accessing the sports event, the stadium. This year, I want to focus on verified identities. So, first of all, what is a verified identity? If we talk about users, we have first name, last name, gender. We have also contact details like email, mobile number. We have address details, as well as authentication options. That might be old-fashioned, a password like cidaas is great, or it might be more innovative authentication options like FIDO2. But we also have the identity status. So if a user or identity is verified and maybe user details which are available on the ID document, so ID card number. Today, there are billions of users and digital services. So if you take me as an example, I use social networks like Facebook, Instagram, and more on a daily basis. I visit different retailers like Kaufland, like Amazon. I also use different streaming services, and I also access my bank account or use car rental services, for example, when I'm in Berlin. In all these contexts, I have the user details, so first name, my age, birth date. I also have address details and the contact details. And I can verify the contact details. So I can verify an email, I can verify a mobile number. If I get back to the use cases, there are use cases and situations where I need to verify the identity. So if I want to open a bank account, a verified email, verified mobile number is not sufficient. So I need to do an identity verification. I need to get the user details verified, need the address details verified, and I also need to verify it's a real person. That's, for example, for bank account. Also in the context of car rental, identity verification might be interesting. I might not need an ID card, but a driver license would be cool to have, to check if the user is allowed to drive this type of vehicle. In the context of streaming, I might have age verification. Obviously, in the other use cases, it's also cool to have an ID verification to know the real user identity, but it's not business critical. So I not only need to verify the contact details, I also need to verify the user details, the address, and if it's a real person. That leads us to the fact that how does a user verify its identity? Many of you know the most common use cases. So there might be NFC, where I can verify maybe with an ID card. I have video agent-based approaches where I talk with a real person via video stream. And I also have the option to visit a physical store, show up there, show my ID card. So in general, I have a standard set of ID documents, ID card, passport, as well as driver license, and I have further ID documents like university card, green card, and more, which I can utilize to verify my identity, or at least partially verify the identity. In the next slide, I will show you how we do it. So you will see a short video how we at cidaas do ID verification. So we have seen a completely automated ID verification process in less than a minute with an ID document. We start with a face scan where we detect if it's a real person. We detect liveness detection, so if it's a real video stream. We then scan the ID document, in our case, front side and back side of the ID document, extract the user details there, and also extract the security features. So we check if it's a real ID document, for example, with holograms. We also do a comparison of the biometric features there. So checking the face in comparison to the image available on the ID document, so the ID card in that use case. The complete process is EIDAS compliant, which is a European regulation for identity verification. And let's have a look what makes the difference compared to other ID verification documents. So we want to see why the cidaas ID validator makes customers happy instead of other ID documents which might make the customer frustrating. In general, it's all related to the customer experience. With other verification processes, you might have long and complicated processes, while we have seen a short process in less than a minute. Not all ID documents might be supported. So if I get back to the use cases where I want to see driver license, I want to see ID card, I want to see passport, an NFC-based approach might only help me with the ID card. So I'm not able to check driver licenses. With a visual process like we have, which dynamically adapts to the ID document, I support all documents. I also don't have any limitations for time and location. I don't need to go to a local store. I don't need to wait in a queue for a video agent to be available. Since it's automated, I can do it anytime, anywhere. And for me, the most important aspect, I don't need a personal contact. The last time I opened a bank account was at 10 p.m. in the evening, sitting on the couch, watching a video. I don't want to get up, go to a local store at 10 p.m. in the evening. It might not be open. And I don't want to be talking with a real person on a video agent-based stream. An auto-ident approach gives me the freedom to do it myself and be completely unrelying of any other person. I don't need to dress up, get up, sit on a chair and talk with a real agent. I can just do it on my couch. I can even go further. With an EIDAS compliant process, I can do a complete digital sales process. So when signing up for a bank account or getting a loan or signing up for an insurance, I can combine this ID verification process with a digital signature process and then have a complete process in a digital world. Not going to any local store, not talking to any video agent. I can just have a full digital process in an automated way, do it yourself by the user. I talk now quite a lot about consumer-centric use cases, but I also want to shortly emphasize identity verification in B2B and B2E use cases. So we have seen online banking, opening a bank account, getting a loan. We also have shortly talked about car rental, so checking the driver license, knowing which vehicles I'm allowed to drive. There might be also insurance use cases where I sign up for new insurance, but also move from the offline to the online world. So I have quite some insurances which are still only offline because I don't utilize them. Now I can go to the insurance, identify myself that I'm the insurance holder, and move it to the digital world. But I also have B2E use cases. So first day at a new job. During the pandemic, that all has changed. So we have especially remote work use cases. In the past, the onboarding of new employees was mostly done offline. So I was able to give them a default password. I was able to really identify the person in the real world. He could provide all his authentication options himself. I could do all the compliance processes on his first week at job. I can even check if he is allowed to access sensitive data. That all has changed. In a remote work, I have employees which I might not have seen in the real world once. So if I want to give them the option to configure their authentication options, be it old-fashioned password, be it multi-factor authentication options, it's great if I can see them or identify them, verify them in a digital process. As mentioned, accessing sensitive data, I might want to verify the identity before giving anyone access to really sensitive data. Not only in B2E, but also in B2B use case, if I want to give partners access on that. And running through all the compliance processes, it might be regulatory required, or it might be nice to have to identify and verify the user identity in that context. The same is for the partner onboarding. So if I want to onboard partners, for example, in insurance use case or banking use case, where partners are selling loans or are selling insurances for me, it would be great if I know the partner, if I can identify them, if I provide them with the option to completely digitally sign up with my company and then verify that's the user, that's the identity, and then give them the option to sell my products. So identity verification is an important part of identity management. If we consider last year's keynote, we have talked about progressive profiling, so moving a user from weak to a strong identity, getting more and more user details, and there identity verification is an important part. So I'm starting with a user where I have basic details like first name, last name. I can verify his contact details like an email, like a mobile number. I can also get his address and maybe verify that it's a real address. But with an identity verification, I really can completely verify the identity itself and verify the most important user details for that use case. So, what's important to take out of that? Identity verification is an essential part of the user data. Because I have regulatory requirements, which makes it important that I have the ID verification. I might have use cases where it's nice to have, like driver license verification, like verification of the age in context of streaming. And I have use cases where it's nice to have because I can provide certain offers if I really know it's a real person. So not only regulatory use cases require an identity verification, but in nearly all use cases it might be important. Moving users from offline to online in an insurance use case. Same for energy suppliers, so moving users from offline users to online users. And that's really important, user identity verification can be user-friendly if it's done properly. If I don't let the user visit a local store, if I don't let the user wait 10 minutes in a queue before talking to a video agent and then having him run through 15 minutes talking with a person who had done 100 other user identity verification processes before at 10 p.m. in the evening, but having a do-it-yourself approach where the user is able to really perform all the processes anytime, anywhere. That's really user-friendly and makes it easy for the process. And that in less than a minute for a two-sided ID verification document. Thanks for joining my keynote today. I'm happy to answer questions if you have any, now on the stage, or later if you want to visit our booth 17. I'm happy to answer all the questions.
Thanks very much, Sadrick, and we do have some questions. I suspect I know the answer to this one. Is there a tendency nowadays to try to collect more consumer identity data than can be justified?
In general, I would say no, because it depends what you or how you define the need of the user data. So I think most of our use cases, what we have seen, there might be regulatory or nice to have requirements to gather identity verification or other user details. And it's also often, we often see also use cases of our customers where they give the freedom to the user to decide what users or data they want to provide. If you provide more data, you might have more or better customer experience, better recommendations maybe in the later process. So it really depends. We have the use cases where it's regulatory required or nice to have, but we also have the use cases where our customers give the freedom to the user back.
Okay, our next question is, what is the impact of deepfake technologies on your ID verification technologies?
That's a good point. During the EIC certification process, we had the same discussion with the BSI, discussing about that. I think it's an attack pattern which can occur. We implemented a few measures to prevent that, but also that will develop further, though it's always a race between hackers and providers of such services. But I think if you really want to attack that, that's not the most easiest pattern. If you want to really overcome the identity verification, you can go out, pay anyone €100, €200, and he will provide you with his ID documents. That's maybe easier to overcome an identity verification or force anyone to do the identity verification for you than using deepfakes. So the effort in overcoming certain measures, there might be easier ways than deepfakes.
Okay. How would you do ID verification in countries where not every citizen has a government ID?